What if I told you that the man whose name now represents some of the most expensive Mercedes cars ever built helped create the technology behind the very first Mercedes? And here's the strange part. Maybach wasn't always a luxury car brand. It disappeared for decades. It returned as a standalone competitor to Rolls-Royce and Bentley, and failed. Then Mercedes brought the name back again, but this time they did something completely different. Today, Maybach sits at the very top of the Mercedes-Benz lineup, offering cars that can cost well over $200,000. So what exactly is Maybach? Is it a separate company? Is it just an expensive Mercedes? And why would someone pay so much more for a Maybach when an S-Class already offers incredible luxury? To understand that, we have to go all the way back to Germany in the 1880s.
Before Maybach became associated with champagne coolers, reclining rear seats, and handcrafted interiors, it was the name of an engineer. His name was Wilhelm Maybach. During the 1880s, Maybach worked alongside Gottlieb Daimler, one of the pioneers of the automobile. At the time, the automobile barely existed in the form we recognize today. The major challenge wasn't building a luxurious car, it was figuring out how to make an engine small and light enough to actually power a vehicle. Daimler brought the vision and business connections. Maybach brought extraordinary engineering ability. Together, they developed engines that would help transform transportation. In 1885, they created an engine that would power one of the earliest motorcycles. Then, just a year later, they adapted their technology for a carriage, and this was one of the critical moments in the development of the automobile. But Maybach wasn't finished. He continued developing engine technology, including improvements to fuel delivery that made engines more practical. Eventually, Maybach became one of the key technical figures behind Daimler's growing automotive operation. And then came a milestone that makes the Maybach story even more fascinating. The Mercedes 35 horsepower, introduced in 1901 and widely regarded as the first modern Mercedes, was developed under Maybach's technical direction. So when you see a Mercedes badge today, you're looking at a brand whose early engineering history is deeply connected to Wilhelm Maybach. But Maybach's story was about to leave the road entirely.
In 1907, Maybach left Daimler following disagreements over the company's direction. Instead of retiring, he started another engineering chapter. This time, he turned his attention toward the sky. Together with his son, Karl Maybach, he developed powerful, lightweight engines for airships, including the famous Zeppelin airships. And this was extremely demanding engineering. An engine powering an automobile can afford to be relatively heavy. An airship cannot. Every kilogram matters. The Maybach engines therefore had to deliver serious power while remaining remarkably light and reliable. The family business became known for high-performance engines, and the Maybach name became associated with precision engineering. But World War I and its aftermath changed everything. Germany faced restrictions on aircraft and airship production, so the Maybach family had to find another direction, and that direction was the automobile. In 1921, the company introduced its first production car, the Maybach W3. But the cars that followed would transform Maybach into an extreme luxury.
During the 1920s and 1930s, Maybach wasn't trying to compete with ordinary luxury cars. It was aiming at the very top of the market. Then came cars such as the Maybach Zeppelin. These machines were enormous, technically sophisticated, and incredibly expensive. Some versions used massive V12 engines at a time when that kind of power was extraordinary. Maybach even developed sophisticated transmission technology designed to make these powerful cars smoother and more usable at higher speeds. But engineering was only half of the story. The bodies were often individually constructed, with custom coachwork and luxurious interiors. These weren't cars designed simply to transport you from one location to another. They were status symbols for wealthy industrialists, royalty, and government leaders. A Maybach represented something very specific. You had reached the absolute top. And because production was extremely limited, owning one was already an exclusive experience. Then history intervened. World War II devastated Germany. The Maybach factory shifted toward military engine production, and after the war, its facilities were heavily damaged. The company faced a choice: rebuild its luxury car business from almost nothing or find another way to survive. They chose survival. Maybach moved heavily into diesel engines for trains, trucks, ships, and industrial machinery. And just like that, the Maybach automobile disappeared.
Here's one of the strangest parts of the story. For roughly 6 decades, there was no Maybach passenger car. The name survived, but primarily as an engine manufacturer. In 1960, Maybach's engine business became part of Daimler-Benz, and that placed the historic Maybach name inside the same corporate family that controlled Mercedes-Benz. But nobody was driving around in a new Maybach luxury sedan. The name essentially went dormant as an automotive luxury badge. Think about that. A company that had once built cars for the world's wealthiest people spent decades building engines instead. Then, near the beginning of the 21st century, Mercedes looked at the luxury market and saw an opportunity. Rolls-Royce was thriving. Bentley was becoming increasingly important in the ultra-luxury segment. Mercedes already had the S-Class, but Mercedes wanted something above it, something that could compete directly at the highest level, and that's when Maybach returned.
In 2002, Mercedes resurrected Maybach as a standalone ultra-luxury brand. This was not simply another Mercedes trim. The idea was that Maybach would sit separately above Mercedes-Benz. The company launched the Maybach 57 and Maybach 62. These were enormous luxury sedans packed with technology and comfort. Rear passengers could enjoy reclining seats, sophisticated climate controls, entertainment systems, and lavish materials. The Maybach 62 was particularly focused on passengers being driven rather than driving themselves. On paper, Mercedes had created exactly what the ultra-luxury market wanted. But there was one enormous problem: the badge. A customer spending hundreds of thousands of dollars doesn't only buy engineering, they buy history. They buy identity. They buy exclusivity. Rolls-Royce had generations of heritage behind it. Bentley had decades of motorsport and British luxury history. Maybach had an incredible history too, but the modern customer didn't necessarily connect that history with the new cars. And there was another problem. The cars were closely related to Mercedes engineering underneath. That meant some buyers perceived the Maybach as an extremely expensive Mercedes rather than a completely separate ultra-luxury automobile. And in this market, perception is everything. Mercedes struggled to achieve the sales numbers it had expected. The standalone Maybach experiment eventually came to an end. By 2013, production had stopped. It looked like Maybach had failed for the second time. But Mercedes had learned something incredibly important. They didn't need to separate Maybach from Mercedes. They needed to make Mercedes itself the foundation of Maybach. And that's when everything changed.
In 2015, Mercedes brought the name back. But this time, Maybach wasn't positioned as an independent brand competing against Mercedes. Instead, it became Mercedes-Maybach. And this was a brilliant strategic change. Think about AMG. AMG takes Mercedes vehicles and pushes them toward extreme performance. Maybach does almost the opposite. It takes Mercedes vehicles and pushes them toward extreme luxury. So instead of asking customers to understand an unfamiliar standalone luxury brand, Mercedes could say, "This is a Mercedes, but this is the ultimate Mercedes." That immediately solved the branding problem. The customer gets the recognition of Mercedes-Benz, combined with the exclusivity of Maybach. And the formula worked. Mercedes-Maybach became especially successful in markets where large luxury sedans and chauffeur-driven vehicles are highly desirable, including China and the Middle East. And Mercedes didn't stop with the S-Class. The Maybach treatment expanded into SUVs. Today, the Maybach philosophy can be found in vehicles such as the Mercedes-Maybach GLS, while Mercedes has also introduced electric Maybach models. So now we get to the question most people actually want answered.
If a Mercedes-Maybach is based on a Mercedes platform, why does it cost so much more? The answer is that Maybach isn't necessarily about completely different mechanical architecture. It's about taking the Mercedes luxury formula much further. First, the rear seat. The biggest difference is where the car's priorities are placed. A standard Mercedes S-Class is designed to be both a luxury vehicle and a driver's car. Maybach places much greater emphasis on the rear passengers. Depending on configuration, you can get highly adjustable executive-style rear seats, extensive legroom, and features designed around being chauffeured. The philosophy is simple. The back seat shouldn't feel like the back seat of a car. It should feel like a private lounge. Second, the cabin. Then there's the interior. A high-spec Mercedes already has premium leather, wood, metal, and advanced technology. Maybach takes those elements and adds more exclusive combinations of materials, stitching patterns, trim, and branding. You may see illuminated Maybach logos, special leather designs, and unique interior themes that aren't available on a normal Mercedes. The objective isn't simply to make the interior look expensive. It's to make it immediately obvious that you've stepped into something above the standard Mercedes experience. Third, quietness. Then there's something you might not notice in a photograph: silence. Maybach models receive extensive attention to cabin isolation. Additional insulation, acoustic glass, and damping materials help reduce outside noise. Why? Because if you're sitting in the rear seat conducting business, talking with someone, or simply relaxing, road noise becomes an annoyance. Maybach engineers are effectively trying to create a moving private room. Fourth, ride comfort. Then comes suspension tuning. AMG asks, how can we make this car exciting? Maybach asks, how can we make the road disappear? That's a completely different engineering philosophy. The suspension is tuned around comfort and smoothness. Sharp bumps, road imperfections, and vibrations are things the car is expected to minimize. The goal isn't to make you feel connected to the road. It's almost the opposite. The goal is to make you forget you're moving at all. Fifth, exclusivity. And finally, there's something you can't measure with horsepower: scarcity. Mercedes sells huge numbers of vehicles. Maybach vehicles are much less common. And in the ultra-luxury world, rarity itself has value. When everyone around you can recognize a Mercedes, a Maybach tells people you're driving something much more exclusive. That's part of what you're paying for.
Here's the interesting part. Maybach isn't necessarily better than every Mercedes. It's better at a very specific mission. If you enjoy driving aggressively, an AMG may make far more sense. If you want a practical luxury car that you can drive every day, a standard S-Class may offer better value. But if your priority is being driven in the quietest, most luxurious Mercedes possible, that's where Maybach makes sense. You're paying for the details. You're paying for the rear seat. You're paying for craftsmanship. You're paying for exclusivity. And yes, you're also paying for the badge. Because at this level, luxury isn't only about what the car can do. It's about how the car makes you feel.
And that brings us back to Wilhelm Maybach, an engineer working alongside Gottlieb Daimler in the 1880s, a man who helped develop some of the earliest engines, a technical figure behind the early Mercedes story, an engineer who later helped power Zeppelins, a family business that built extraordinary luxury cars for the elite, a brand that disappeared for around 6 decades, a failed attempt to return as an independent ultra-luxury competitor, and finally, a second resurrection that worked. Today, Maybach isn't trying to replace Mercedes. It sits on top of Mercedes, and that's what makes the modern Maybach strategy so clever. Mercedes gives you the foundation, AMG gives you the performance, and Maybach gives you the ultimate expression of luxury. So the next time you see a Mercedes-Maybach on the road, don't think of it as simply an expensive Mercedes. You're looking at the latest chapter of a story that began more than a century ago. A story of engineering, failure, reinvention, and one of the most unusual comebacks in automotive history. But now, I want to hear from you. Would you spend your money on a Mercedes-Maybach? Or would you choose an AMG? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed discovering the story behind one of the most misunderstood badges in the automotive world, subscribe, because there are plenty more legendary automotive names with fascinating stories hiding behind them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.